think it's important to reflect on the fact that the relationships between climate, nature, and crime is actually an old idea, but it hasn't been really examined collectively in a comprehensive way. What we're seeing in the last decade, though, is a growing community of scholars, both in the climate and nature communities, but also in the crime communities, looking at that convergence and that relationship. Typically, when we talk about the climate security nexus, the focus has been on the ways in which climate change affects vulnerability in vulnerable communities, and then ultimately that results in social unrest and political violence. We at Igarapé look at it slightly differently. We look at the relationships between insecurity, that is to say organized crime, how it's affecting vulnerable communities, and then ultimately resulting in nature loss or environmental distress or ecological decline or even climate change. And in places like the Amazon Basin or in the Congo Basin or in Southeast Asia, where you have these enormous tropical biomes, we also have, unfortunately, a lack of rule of law, preponderance towards organized crime. And what we're seeing increasingly are organized crime groups are getting more and more involved, not just in cocaine trafficking or people smuggling or drug or exchanges of drugs, but also they're getting involved in extraction of environmental commodities, from timber to mining materials to wildlife. And all of this extraction, these illicit markets, are contributing to deforestation, are contributing to forest degradation, are contributing to nature loss, and that has dramatic implications for climate. The challenge, I think, for a lot of the research community, and including the policy community, is that this relationship between organized crime, climate, and nature, it hasn't really filtered up into these multilateral domains of diplomacy. Only in the last couple of years, in COP28 and COP29, did we see mention of this relationship. At COP30, we're expecting this to be a prominent theme. So we expect to see diplomats coming together, talking about how rule of law and climate action, they're not two silos, they're inseparable. Well, there are a lot of relationships between climate and crime. I mean, one of which is the fact that organized crime is involved in extracting timber and minerals and wildlife, all of which has an implication for our natural world and the integrity of our ecosystems. But what we're seeing increasingly is organized crime is fusing with environmental crime. We're seeing drug traffickers getting involved in extracting timber and minerals because these are highly profitable. And there's a very dangerous and worrying phenomenon, which is critical minerals and rare earths. We're starting to see criminal organizations, not just in Latin America, but also in Africa and Southeast Asia, beginning to get involved in extraction of coltan, of niobium, of gold, of rare earth minerals. These minerals, as we all know, are critical to the clean energy transition. So there's a paradox, which is that crime and criminal actors and networks are actually disrupting the global supply chains for many of these incredibly important commodities that are critical to decarbonization and driving renewable energy. So there are many relationships. I think they're coming to the fore. We're seeing more and more research communities, including at CAS and CEBRI and Igarapé Institute and elsewhere, starting to do empirical studies to be able to demonstrate these relationships more emphatically. But until we build that awareness, unfortunately, we're not going to see it as prominent in our multilateral spaces as we should. Many challenges with organized crime around the world, and I think one of the big issues today is that I'm not entirely sure that our nation states and our diplomats are fully cognizant of just how quickly it's metastasizing, how dramatically organized crime is penetrating our state institutions, not just at the federal level, but at the state and municipal scale. Latin America, in some ways, is ground zero for organized crime around the world. We have the largest drug trafficking organizations in Colombia and Brazil and Mexico. We have high levels of arms trafficking, often with guns that are shipped in illegally from the United States that are circulating in the United States, in Latin America. And we have a whole range of other challenges related to people trafficking and increasingly environmental crime, including in our big basins. Most of the cocaine and many of the commodities that are extracted from Latin America and traded to Europe ultimately transit through either the Pacific coast or the Atlantic coast through Latin America, generating a whole host of negative externalities, including violence. But they end up on the streets with consumers in Europe. And so what we're seeing in the last couple of years, especially since 2020 and 21, when there was an explosion of cocaine and when gold prices started to soar because of the instability in people turning to gold, was a dramatic increase in production of cocaine as well as an extraction of gold. A lot of those products went, not exclusively, but went to Europe. And so what we're seeing in Europe today is an explosion, not just of consumption, but also of interdictions, of seizures, of arrests, and violence. And I think what we're seeing in the ports of the Netherlands or in Germany or in Belgium, as well as in the streets of Paris or in Hamburg or in other capitals like London, is an increase in violence associated with organized crime in Latin America. And I think this is raising awareness, not just, of course, in our part of the world here in Brazil, but also in Europe, that they need to do more. They need to get smarter in terms of both joint operations, increased intelligence, going after the money, including through anti-money laundering interdiction operations, as well as looking into new technologies and the ways in which a lot of these products are moving, including in relation to crypto transactions, which are being used to facilitate for payments. So what we're seeing is a growing attention, I think, in Europe because of the sheer scale of the challenges and its relationship to Latin America, and the need for a tighter cooperation and a greater joint enterprise in trying to arrest what is a metastasizing and accelerating phenomenon.